Okay, this section is about linear algebra. Now, I would say that knowing linear algebra is very foundational to these tests. There are a lot of questions that are going to expect you to know linear algebra. And you probably do, of course, but this is the sort of thing that you don't want to one-off or think you can figure it out on the test. You want to make sure you've got that linear algebra down as a core foundational skill, that you understand it. And this is the first time I'm going to say a thing that you're going to hear me say quite a bit, actually, the more we get into this, is for these tests, you really want to know the algebra of your geometry and the geometry of your algebra. So whereas in your brain, there might be a file that says linear algebra, and you've got, I don't know, y equals mx plus b in there. And you've got another geometry folder in your brain that's talking about rays and lines and parallel lines. We're going to have to cross-index that. Now, I'm still going to make a geometry section about lines, of course, but you might need to go back between the two videos if you are a little bit rusty on what I'm talking about. Okay, so you want to remember that these tests gain relevancy by getting you to get questions wrong, and they know that linear algebra is a thing that you should have been taught. They also know that lines and geometry is a thing you should have been taught. But a lot of people didn't have those crossed. We don't necessarily think of the slope of parallel lines all the time. So it's very, very much fair game, and yet still tricky because it's not what you're used to. So make sure that you can see the connections. Okay? All right. All right. Linear algebra. So when we're talking about linear algebra, think back when we were doing exponents. We have n to the first equals n. Remember I said you can represent that geometrically with a line? I want you to remember that. When you take things to the first power, you're dealing with lines. So when we say linear algebra, we're talking about variables that have been taken to the first power. Okay? For our purposes, this is usually going to be with just x and y. Technically speaking, if you have x, y, and z, or any other number of constants, you're still dealing with linear algebra, but for our purposes, we're going to be talking about binomials. All right, so we have the standard form of the line, which is ax plus by is equal to c. We have the slope-intercept form of the line, y is equal to mx plus b. A thing that bothers me about teaching linear algebra is that this b is not this b. And I don't know why that is. They could have chosen any other letter for this to be the y-intercept, for b to be, to be or not to be. And yet they chose b, but we have a b here, and they're not the same. And that just bothers me. You're going to see ax plus by equals c a lot when it comes to systems of equations. And I'm not going to say systems of equations are exclusively linear, because they're not. But most of the system of equation questions will be linear algebra questions. There's going to be a lot of vocab questions about linear algebra as well. And they're not always going to have it put into this form. Sometimes it will be y is equal to b minus mx or something like that. Just so you know, we're still linear as long as x and y are taken to the power of 1. Okay, so let's talk about what a constant is and what a variable is. So when we're talking about the equation of a line or equation of a parabola or equation of a circle, the constant is the thing that doesn't change, that describes the shape of the thing. X and y change, so those are the variables. The constants, the variables. Okay, so in the standard form of the line, a, b, and c are constants. All right? And as you can see, this is a binomial, which means we have two terms either added or subtracted together. Y equals mx plus b is the slope-intercept form of the line. This has parameters. You can look at the slope-intercept form and know quickly, if you understand what m and b mean, what the line looks like. So m is the slope. And when we say slope, we literally mean like the slope on the side of a mountain. Slope is how fast something rises and falls over a distance. No, not how fast, how far something rises or falls over a distance. Or in other words, we call this rise over run. Now that's not going to get you through the entire test. You're still going to need to know the slope equation, which is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now if you mix these y's up, it kind of matters, but it kind of doesn't. So as long as they're in the same ordered pair, you're going to be fine. So like this needs to be an ordered pair right here, and this needs to be an ordered pair right here. You're going to get to this. You're going to get the same answer. If it's positive, one of them will be positive over positive, and the other one will be negative over negative. And if it's negative, one will be positive, one will be negative, and they'll switch. It'll be fine. They have you learn it this way because when you start doing vectors, direction matters, and so whichever one is y2 matters. But when we're talking about linear algebra, we're not talking about vectors. Direction doesn't matter. It goes in the same direction forever. I mean, it goes in two directions forever, excuse me. B is the y-intercept. Another way to think about the y-intercept is the y value when x is 0, okay? The y-intercept, so x is 0 for the y-intercept, all right? Now, a lot of times you're going to be given the standard form of the line, and they're going to ask you something about the slope or the y-intercept. In order to figure that out, we're going to have to understand, you're going to have to put it in the slope form. So let me just show you how I do that. I think this is the most efficient way. I subtract the ax term. by is equal to negative ax plus c. I do it this way because that's the form I want it to be in. I'm going to divide by b. Y is equal to negative a over bx plus c over b. Okay? So to summarize, m will always be negative a over b, and let's call it b sub 2 will always be c over b sub 1. Annoying, right? Very, very annoying. Okay. All right, I'm not going to do this very often, but I am going to give you a problem in this session because I kind of want to show you what I meant about understanding the geometry of your algebra. Okay? Let's say we have this system of equations. We have ax plus 3y is equal to 7. And we have, I'm just making it up as I go, 5x plus 2y is equal to 11. Okay, we have a system of equations here. And they say to you, the test says, these two lines never meet. What is A? What are you going to do? Okay, so you got to pull out the geometry folder. What does it mean when two lines never meet? It means they're parallel. Parallel lines have the same slope. So therefore, in order for these to be parallel, they have to have the same slope. So we can just say, okay, well, negative a over 3 is equal to 5 over 2, negative 5 over 2. So this is going to be 2a is equal to 15. A is equal to 15 over 2. Now, the math was actually quite easy, but when I give my students this problem, a lot of times they just don't know what to do because most of my students know that parallel lines have the same slope. They know that, but because of the way the question's asked, they don't pull out their geometry folder. Okay, so yeah, parallel lines, they're parallel whether we're in geometry or in linear algebra. Okay, I'm going to draw an xy coordinate graph here real fast. Let's say we have this line, forgive me for not making a very straight line, and it crosses here at 0, 3, and here at -4, 0. Okay, I would like you to try to tell me the slope-intercept form of this line. Go ahead and pause your video until you think you have it. Okay, so this is going to be y is equal to 3/4. I know it's 3/4 because we rise 3 and we run 4. You could also do the slope equation. So we can do 3 minus 0 over 0 minus -4, which will be 3/4. Or you may have done 0 minus 3 over -4 minus 0, which is -3 over -4, or 3/4. Now, something you should keep in mind, just as a gut check, if the line goes up, going from left to right, you have a positive slope. The line goes down from left to right, you have a negative slope. Okay. A perfectly horizontal slope has a slope of 0, and when you have a line that is completely vertical, it doesn't have a slope. There's no slope. Technically, it's infinity. Well, not technically. You would think of it as a slope of infinity, but if you were to figure that in your calculator, for example, it makes an error. It's kind of like dividing by 0. Well, it actually literally is divided by 0 because the run is 0. So up and down, no slope. Okay. All right, so let's say we want to find the midpoint between these 2 points. Now I'm going to write down the midpoint formula, but I don't want you to write it down, okay? If you're making notes. Let's see, so the midpoint formula is x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2 and y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. What is it? What do we call it when you add 2 numbers together and divide by 2? Or you add 3 numbers together and divide by 3, or 4 numbers together and divide by 4? What do we call that? It's the average. The midpoint formula is just the average of the 2 points. That's it. You don't need to memorize this formula. Okay. The average of -4 and 0 is -2. And the average of 0 and 3 is 1.5. The midpoint of this line is -2, 1.5. We do not need the midpoint formula. I'm trying to save you brain space. You have to know what an average is. So since you already have to know what an average is, how to find averages, you don't need to know the midpoint formula. The distance. I'm going to write down the distance formula. Again, don't write it down, okay? The distance formula is the square root of the change of x, it actually doesn't matter if it's y, whichever one is first here, squared plus the change of y squared. Why don't you need to memorize this? Well, let's take a closer look at what is happening here. The change of x, depending on which one you do first, and it doesn't matter, is either going to be plus or minus 4. The change of y is going to be this right here. Depending on which one you choose first, will be plus or minus 3. This is the Pythagorean theorem. The distance will be this guy right here. You know, so if we do the algebra here, I square both sides. Distance squared will be equal to 4 squared plus 3 squared. This is the Pythagorean theorem. You don't need to memorize the distance formula, and I'm sorry if your teachers made you memorize it. You have to know the Pythagorean theorem. Absolutely. You're going to need to know the Pythagorean theorem. If you're taking the SAT or the PSAT, it's actually at the beginning of the test. Even though you really are going to use the Pythagorean theorem, you really have to understand it. But because you already have to know the Pythagorean theorem, you don't need to know the distance formula. Okay, so let's say you've got this guy over here. I'm just going to eyeball it. That looks like it could be like 10, 12. And let's say we have this guy right here. -9, -2. All right, so let's say we want to find the midpoint, and who knows how close I am eyeballing this. So the average of 10 and -9, I should have made them even numbers, is going to be 1/2. No, sorry, yeah, no, 1/2. Okay, so I'd probably about right here. Okay, and the average of -2 and 12 will be 5. So I think I did pretty well there. Looks pretty good. Well, 5 would be more up here, but I just, I'm eyeballing it here. The distance formula, just draw a right triangle. Don't even do the subtraction or the change of whatever. Don't do that. Just this 19 and 14. Okay, so this is going to be the square root of 19 squared plus 14 squared. Whatever that is. $23-ish. 24-ish. 23.6. That tracks. That seems like that would probably be what it would be. It is, okay? So you're just going to find the average of the 2 points if you need to find the midpoint, and you're just going to do the distance formula if you need. There's plenty of linear algebra problems without making them more difficult than they are, okay? I want to make a couple of other cross references here. Well, one really. And we'll get into this more when we do trigonometry, but I want you to remember that if you consider this a right triangle here, tangent is equal to slope. Let's call this theta, rise, run. Opposite is rise, adjacent is run. It's all connected. Again, there's a lot of linear algebra. I've reviewed it, but you have to jump in, and this will not be enough for you. Like, don't think that you can get through these videos and think you're going to be prepared. You need to take practice tests because they are clever and they are wily. There's a lot of linear algebra questions. Okay.